Today I'm going to talk a little bit about rethink your thinking. I'll share a little bit about what I've learned, what I want to share about navigating change, because that's in essence what I do. And I think also what our clients are doing every day. A little bit about change. What is change? Today's businesses thrive if they are able to constantly adapt to technological progress and people's changing needs. And those two things are really essential. And of course, people change. So businesses have to change, their products and services have to change, but how and in which direction? And I think that's what keeps us all busy in this industry. One of the best books I've read about change is written by this guy. It's called Luc de Brabander. He's Belgian. We have another Belgian here in the room, so maybe hopefully he can relate. Luc de Brabander is a professor, he's a consultant, and he is a really good thinker. And I want to share, in a very simple way, a little bit of his thinking here.
If you want to be a successful manager,
thank you.
Successful strategist, you need to change twice. And let's take some simple examples. Imagine somebody always late. No. Why is change for this person? To become somebody on time. And you can separate the two types of change. In reality, what does it mean? Maybe a better organization, I don't know, less meetings or a better GPS in the car. It's not enough. If he does only that, not enough. He or she needs to change her perception of punctuality. Suddenly realize, hey, it's good to be on time. It's efficient. It's nice. I have time for a coffee. Then, and only then, he will be on time.
Right? It's so simple, but I mean, this guy has thought his whole life about this, right? So these people can make this really simple. It's quite amazing. But if you drill down a little bit, this comes from his book, and the forgotten half of change. So you have changing reality, which is more one side of the brain, and you have changing perception, which is a little bit more the other side of the brain. Some people, you don't know, have two sides of our brains, right? The more emotional side and the more functional or factual side. And it's really interesting to read this book if you are in the business of helping others to change or helping your brand to change. Now, what our clients need, if you drill it down, is to adapt faster to the changing needs of customers and markets with technology, with everything that's happening. But what we as designers usually do is to create beautiful, sometimes if we're lucky or if we're really good at this, even effective, audible, tangible, and visual artifacts. That's basically design. But that's not enough. I think real change comes only when you truly answer your clients' questions to adapt faster to changing needs of customers and markets. So what we need to do as designers is lead the continuous innovation which delivers products, services, and experiences that meet people's needs. Think about it, because it's really difficult, and you need to involve a lot of other people. This is not something that's done only by designers. But designers do play a role, whether they're inside an organization or outsiders from an agency that are flown in to help change things. As long as we keep this in mind, this is what we should be doing as designers. So if we drill that down, what our client needs, what you do and what others do, then if you look at the interactions, it's very simple. If others do what the client needs, then you lose. If you do exactly what others do, but the client doesn't need it, you're just stupid. If you do what others do and what the client needs, then you take big risks. But the others, there's more of them, right? So they might all run away with your clients. So what you need to do, of course, is find that sweet spot where you win. So do something different from what others do, but that different is still what the client needs. So it's finding out what the client needs and then carving out your own spot in life and in work that is different from what others are doing in that field. And that's what I and my colleagues have been trying to do in the past 30 years, basically. So we have a brand, and a brand makes a promise. That's the essence of what the brand does. And then we have products and services that are basically the delivery on that promise. Now, this morning we heard from Ken and others that we should be talking really not about products and services, but more about relationships and experiences, etc. It's all true and it's bullshit at the same time. We're still talking about products and services, right? I'm an old geezer and this is what I believe, and it's just simpler. And they also fit nicer in these bubbles because they don't overlap. So short words, I love short words. So brand, products, and services. What is a brand? I think the best statement about this was by Seth Godin. You can read it. So you can see stories are in there, relationships are in there, all the things that others have talked about today. It's all true. It's all absolutely true. Memories, expectations, it's a lot. And everything gets amalgamated and processed by our brains. And what we want to do is carve out a unique spot in the brain of as many people as possible that are relevant for your brand, right? That's in essence what brand builders are doing. Unfortunately, a lot of companies don't do this yet. Because where brand, products, and services overlap, that's really where the magic happens, right? Where the brand is fully aligned, so the promise is fully aligned with what the delivery does. But what we see and learn and experience every day is basically that the brand lives somewhere else on a planet of its own. It's not really connected to the products and services. And what do you get? What you're left with is just features. A lot of features. So basically featureitis, or because it's possibilities, or this is very good for my egotosis, right? It's a disease anyway, right? Features. Product features, brand features, whatever, features. We don't want features. We want to start with the brand and really think about what the brand does and what it is supposed to do. If it works really well, then it makes experiences recognizable, consistent, coherent, expressive, all those things. And they all, in the end, lead to brand preference, or even, if you do it really well and consistently, brand loyalty. The strongest brands are brands that people love, people will keep on interacting with, buying, etc. We all know Apple. I've used Apple since the very early days, when it was a piece of crap, to be honest. My first computer that I bought, which was incredibly expensive, I think 1 week after the period that it was covered by an insurance, it died on me, literally. This was in the early 1990s. And I had to go back to the shop, and they said, yeah, we basically have to replace the motherboard. Your computer has died on you, so, but we'll give it to you. Even though it's 1 week after, so they were very nice, but it was something that stuck with me because back then Apple didn't make such very good products yet. This was in the time that Steve Jobs wasn't there. 3 or 4 years later, he joined back, and the rest is history. So we want brand, products, and services to really work together, and we want to find that place where the magic happens. I've been here now in Singapore for 5 years. I've had some really good experiences with clients. I've had some pretty bad experiences with clients. But I want to share one really good experience with a client where I think together we made a little bit of magic. And that was how the Hub Singapore, as it was called a few years ago, how they found themselves, basically. So we started with, of course, a brand profile session. And the people that were in the room yesterday afternoon, they experienced a similar process that we did with them at the start. And Grace Tsai, the founder and owner of Impact Hub Singapore, she invited us, but she wasn't sure whether she wanted to work with us yet. But she said, I have another offer of another agency which is very compelling. So what can you do to counter that? And I said, well, let's work together for up to a day. And after that day, you decide whether you want to work with us or not. So that's what we did. And we had a lot of fun. Of course, Post-its flew around the room, and we replastered the walls and all that. But it's not so important what you see. I mean, Post-its are Post-its, but it's more what happens up here with the people that are there, right? And basically, they worked together under our facilitation, guidance, in redefining their own brand. And the people in the room knew their brand inside out. They knew exactly what they had built. The interesting thing is, of course, the core client of Impact Hub is a startup guy, right? So we called him Hypergrowth Henry. So we call these personas always something, right? So we called them founder Thomas, startup geek Greg, this one is hypergrowth Henry, and then we have aspiring N. We have investor Jack, and we have corporate Jenny. So these are the personas that we created there and we defined. And the middle one is the core classic user of a co-working space and part of the community. And that's where most of the revenue of a company like Impact Hub comes from. And down here you also see what kind of role does the organization play for these organizations, for these people. So here they are facilitator, here they are partner, here they're convener, bringing people together. Here they're more the broker, making connections between startups and money, basically. And they're partner again. So there's an interesting connection between this and that. And that person there on the side, the corporate Jenny, when we started this process, she was not one of the personas. She only popped up during the workshop. When Grace said, I think we're overlooking somebody, and that somebody is already bringing in about 30% of our annual revenue, and that's these corporates that want to tap in to our community and want to understand what our community does and how startups tick, because they want to be a little bit of a startup themselves, right? A lot of corporates want to feel what it's like to have a startup mentality. So there's a market there. And long story short, we looked, of course, at the Hyper Henrys, and we looked at the corporate Jennies, and we filled out these templates together as we do. But the corporate Jennies were really an interesting person. So in the weeks and months after, Grace, with other people, people within the organization and outside the organization, thought further about it, and it became more and more important as, for her, a way to carve out that different path to the future for her brand, compared to what everybody else in this very, very crowded space of co-working was doing. In the meantime, we were working on name development, very important. There were lots of name waves, as we call them, and in these name waves, two names popped up as their favorites, up to a certain point. One name was Saga, and this is a little bit the story behind Saga, why this word Saga. And the other is Amph. And the problem with these both names was that they both were good, but not good enough. Saga, because it was a really good meaning, story, it tapped onto heritage, very Singaporean, connects with a lot of things that Impact Hub was trying to build as well. So did Amph. Amph was edgy, cool, bold, different. Can we find a word that connects these two? So there was a bit of a stretch. So we went back to our naming specialists. I'm not a naming specialist. I love thinking of beautiful words and stuff, but I'm not a naming expert. But fortunately, we have somebody very close to us who's really good at this. And she said, wow, okay, this is interesting. Let's see whether we can find some other options here. So in the next name waves, we had, again, about 15 different names, and one of them was found. And I want to read this because I think it's quite essential. Everyone involved in this business and space are essentially founders. Founders of new and exciting realms and ventures. In sound and art, it refers to collected in its natural state and presented in new context as part of a greater work. And in shipping, it means equipped. The name embodies an inclusivity, which is meaning of pioneer, creator, initiator, and organizer. From the Latin fundere, meaning to melt, this solid name is about essential foundation and finding your tribe to forge your future path. So this name stuck, and they couldn't get rid of it anymore. They were already thinking about what can you do with this name. And of course, we also started thinking about what can we do with this name. So long story short, again, this took another few weeks. They came up with a further story. What Found is the brain's trust of the new social economy, blah, 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 blah. If there are two groups of people in the world, those who adapt to reality and those who change it, founders are those who change it. There's that word again, change. And we created this logo. And the designer of the logo is in the room. I'm very happy that she's here. And there are some little things going on in this logo. It's incredibly simple. It's almost too simple for words. But how many circles are in this logo? It's really 5, but that's okay. But 4 is a good answer because basically there are 2 small dots, black dots, and there are 2 white circles, right? In the middle of the O and the middle of the D. So it's like the disconnect, it's the yin and yang, so you find a new purpose or something like that. Anyway, and then there's also the full stop, right? And the full stop is a connector, so we can make it founder, but then slightly different. Or found ventures, or found elevates, or found SG, found JKT, Jakarta, KL, Bangkok, found us. So this also became the URL, because found.com was, of course, somebody else's, but found us was available, it was for sale, and not too expensive. So we bought it, and from then on, it was found us. And we created the branding, and of course, the F became the symbol, which fits in a square and ended in a circle, which is really important nowadays. You can play with things. This was the final design toolkit, you could say. And we make all kinds of beautiful applications, of course, and social media, postings, Instagram.
We also did the wayfinding and signage for Found's new Amoy Street flagship location. And then something else happened. After about a year, Found merged with Collision 8, another co-working and corporate innovation company in Singapore, and it was very logical to combine them under the new name Found 8.
What I'm very happy with that we kept almost all of the design vernacular, the language, the visual and color language intact, even though it was a merger of equals. But the owner and the director of Collision 8 realized Found has a stronger brand. Collision 8 by that time had already existed for 6 or 7 years as Collision 8, Found only for 1 year. So that said something about what the team at Found had already built up with that new name and with that new logo, etc. It was just super humbling and also super fantastic to see that happening. So what can you learn from this? I think Grace Tsai and her team were incredibly courageous when they took the leap of faith. One, to work with us after that half-a-day workshop, to carve out a new path for the future, which is different from everybody else in the co-working space, to choose a name like Found, which is just the most normal word you can think of, right? Found, okay, Found. Why is that a good name? It takes courage, and it takes passion and understanding. So how do you take the leap, right? How do you innovate? How do you innovate your brand, your presence? Now that's a story on its own. A little bit about that. So if you go from a current situation to an ambition, and you take steps, what you usually find out in processes, especially internally, is that you will never reach that ambition because it's an optimization process, the way that it works. You set an ambition and you know that that ambition should be attainable and things like that. But the problem is you're left with a legacy gap, as we call it. So it's very, very difficult to reach that ambition if you set that ambition within certain boundaries. Now, if you put courage on top of that and dare to make a much bigger leap, then hopefully, and find a radical ambition, then of course there's always a reality that kicks in. So you have the competitive reality of that ambition is probably not realistic and you have to go some steps back. And then hopefully, that's what we do as an agency, push you then forward again, try to bring you as close to that radical ambition as possible. But wherever you end up, it's certainly a lot further away and a lot more courageous and ambitious than the first ambition that you set, right? So some things that we learned and that I want to share with you today, the things that we solved, things that we fucked up, stuff that we learned from others, and just some general shit. People are not machines. They're not robots. Robots are machines. We work in our Amsterdam office, for instance, for Schiphol Airport. It's our biggest client at the moment. We help them to create flows through the airport, optimized flows, because Amsterdam Airport is getting fuller and fuller, and it's becoming more and more difficult to get all these people go through customs and through check-in and whatever. So what is the solution? Technology. So they bring in a lot of machines. But all of these machines are not designed from a user perspective. This is an example of a machine which is designed from a user's perspective, right? So this is, you know, the CAT scan, of course, okay? So Philips came up with the idea of a kitten scan. Not a CAT scan, but a kitten scan. For children, just to get them in a different mindset so they accept what's going to happen to them if their brain needs to be scanned. Who of you has had a brain scan on a CAT scanner? One hand, 2, 3, 4, 5. I haven't done it. I've never been in such a machine, fortunately. My wife has been in it many times. And what she told me is that it's completely weird what's happening to you because it makes a hell of a lot of noise. It's like you go crazy. It feels like every particle in your head, in your brain, gets shifted around. You know, so there's a lot going on. And for children, I mean, a human being who's grown up can process this and can read about it and can more or less prepare for the experience, right? But children cannot. They have no clue, no idea, and suddenly something happens. So what Philips has come up with is a way to make them, in their own world, make them a little bit more or a bit less scared and a little bit more prepared for what's going to happen. Some companies, or some hospitals, I should say here, are also trying to do something for grown-ups. This is an example that I found somewhere online. So to just make the whole experience a little bit more human, basically, which is great, I think. Not sure whether this is the solution. It's a bit of a Popeye theme going on here. Ahoy! But the fact that they try is great, right? And I think more and more designers should be working in this field and should be thinking about how can we make these incredibly sterile processes that are happening to human beings, especially when they're at their most vulnerable. How can we make them more human, more, at least, you know, less problematic and less cold? Humans are not cold beings, right? So this is at least an attempt to make that space and that experience a little bit warmer. I love it. So your brand can help to give technology personality. That's really important, that technology is not something that lives on its own. And also in airports, we're working on that. How can we make those machines a little bit more human in how they behave, how they go up and down? For instance, we have these screens moving up and down now because some people are tall and others are very short, right? So, and you need to look at something, it needs to recognize your face nowadays, not your fingerprint or something, no, your face. I'll come back to face recognition a little bit later. So it's important that that behavior of that machine is done in such a way that it's, one, very efficient and very fast, because that's what the airport wants. And for the humans that come through, that have to be processed, it needs to feel very normal, very pleasant. So it's almost opposing things happening. So redesigning that is really a challenge, and we love these kind of big challenges. Not everyone is as smart as you are. It's really important as a designer, as a brand manager, as a marketeer to really understand this. So this is the basis of the IQ, so from 50 to 150, and you see the figures up there. And it basically means that 50% of us, and that's all of us here in the room, of course, are on the right-hand side of this curve. So somewhere between normal and incredibly intelligent. But it also means, of course, there's 2.3% who are basically retarded. They're out of any brand reach, you can never influence them, etc. But then there's 47.7% that are somewhere between lightly retarded and normal. Almost half of all of us, right? Half of the population. So what's really important is that when you create machines or interfaces, and we do this on a daily basis, that you don't only design for that 50% on the right, but that you keep that 47.7% on the left also very much in mind. This is what the Dutch interface looks like. Anyone who's been to the Netherlands and has tried to get a train ticket there, I mean, it's a lot better than in Berlin or in Antwerp, but it's still, it can be improved. You see all these tiles, and you have to figure out, you know, which tiles to press when, and in which order to get your ticket out of that machine, the damn thing. And this guy, this Dutch designer, interaction designer, he lived and worked for many years in another country, I think in the United States, and he came back to the Netherlands. And it was the first time he got confronted with this interface, and he thought, oh, that can be improved. So he did that. He made a really, really well thought through alternative design for it. And of course, he presented it to the Dutch railways and it was too difficult to implement and blah, 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 blah. That's unfortunate, but it's great because people can change things. And sometimes it's an individual who can really make big change. And what he did, because he was both Dutch and a foreigner, because he had lived abroad for a long period of time. So he understood that you should not only design this for Dutch people, and this left interface is for Dutch people. Of course, you can switch to English, but it doesn't make it more understandable. And another learning that he had was that, so you have to make the system faster for regular users, because especially the commuters that need a ticket out of this machine every day, they want to do it as fast as possible, because they time box their running to the train exactly, because they know which platform to go to and when the train leaves. And Dutch trains are pretty punctual. But you have to provide a lot more information and help for first-time users, and make sure that first-time users from abroad can do this also in their own language. And you have to find a good balance between beauty and usability. They're not necessarily the same. They're not necessarily aligned. So as a designer, you also have to always compromise a little bit. So don't be a stupid brand. Be relevant for everyone, exclude no one. Well, maybe that 2.3% retarded on the left, I mean, they're lost cause anyway, right? So 3, I will go a little bit faster. Consumer centricity is often wishful thinking. This is a great example. So this is Sammy's digital experience journey. I found it somewhere online. And so this is a company who thought, we want to bring digital experience into the world of coffee. And they carved out this whole user experience for familiarization, evaluation, acquiring, utilizing, consuming, and then advocate. So that's the whole customer journey, right? Through the coffee experience, with all kinds of touch points, digital touch points. They offer Sammy the chance to sign up to their loyalty program, where he is rewarded with a free hot chocolate after his 9th visit. Designers dream on. I mean, this is bullshit. This is really bullshit. What we project on our customers and are able to execute is often very different from what those customers really want. So you have to involve real people, real customers, real users, whatever you call them, doesn't matter, just as long as it's the people that your product or service is intended for. Because they have other questions, they have other problems. And if you don't know those, and if you only from your design high tower think you know what they want, you can come up with this, but you should be answering those questions. So your brand is the interface to communicate with your audience. They don't care about your insufficient processes or impossible back office. How you solve that is your problem. It needs to work for them, and otherwise they're gone. You have to start by improving reality, not image. Reality precedes image. Great example, everybody knows this case, I think, BP. They changed their logo to this in 2000, and immediately they got a lot of backlash online, but also in the newspapers, etc. Because this was greenwashing, right? How can BP, this oil company, put a sunflower as their logo? And of course, BP had a big, brimming story about this that was underlying the strategy and everything. And beautiful design. I mean, it's a beautiful logo. It's really well crafted and everything. But this was still happening. This is about 10 years later in the Gulf of Mexico, huge oil spill. And BP couldn't stop it. They couldn't figure out how to stop this. So it went on for months. And it was the Deepwater Horizon disaster. Some of you may have remembered. And BP got really slashed for it. And not just in reality, but also in their logo. So yeah, it's very easy if you put this promise out there, and the delivery doesn't live up to that promise, then this will happen, and you have to be prepared for that. A great example of and how creative people are also to create something really sordid with this logo. Who believes this guy? So for whom don't know who he is, this is Mark Zuckerberg. This is their promise now, okay? The future is private. The past was not private, apparently, but the future is private. The problem is I don't believe him. I don't trust him. I use Facebook. I play the game like everybody else, but I don't trust him. And why? Because I read. I want to be informed. I know that he sells us, the users, to others. He sells them to the Chinese government. Facial recognition by the millions. All our faces, the faces of our friends, Facebook captures them with their clever software and sells all those faces that are captured to the Chinese government. And what do they do with it? They build more and more sophisticated machines and technologies that will make sure that they exactly can pinpoint every Uyghur between others. And that's how the Uyghurs are being kept prisoner in their own country, through facial recognition and all kinds of other technologies that are being fed by Facebook's knowledge. And this is how Facebook has become, in a very, very short time, one of the most valuable and most earning companies in the world. Data. Not advertising. Advertising is small change, really. Even on these platforms. I mean, they have eradicated most of the advertising industry, but it's not about advertising. And the same thing is with Google. Last year, middle of last year, they officially took this out of their code of conduct for users. This was the original meaning and promise of Google. Do no evil. Don't be evil. Apparently, last year, very quietly, but it was picked up here and there, they removed don't be evil from their code of conduct. And the most telling thing is what's here. Here, filed to evil is fine now, right? Okay, evil is fine now. So apparently, I mean, I love Google. They do a really good job. They have fantastic design and products and services or whatever. But deep down, there's something wrong. There is something wrong. And the problem is that we don't pay for all those services. We don't pay for them. Yes, we do, but not with money. We pay with privacy. We pay with our bodies, our minds, our faces. And it's still okay as long as we realize this. And the problem is, if you look at all their own communications of Google and of Facebook, they're constantly creating this fantastic, beautiful, shiny cloud of misinformation. A really good brand, even these big, big brands, can't lie. They shouldn't lie. If you don't deliver on the brand promise, people will walk away. Maybe not today, but I wonder if they continue doing it like they do now, whether Facebook still is so successful in 10 years from now. I'm sure they will still exist, but I also feel there will be others that are still small or tiny today, but might be the next big thing in 10 years from now, because they understand the problems that Google and Facebook have brought themselves into. Because I'm also sure that Google and Facebook didn't realize what was going to happen to them in the past 15 years. It also somehow happened to them because they became so big, because they became so successful. They had to continue that, so they started selling data. And they started selling data to more and more large companies and organizations without checking what they would do with that data. Cambridge technology, right? A lot of digital services do the same and look the same. That's also so interesting to see, right? I mean, okay, this is a Dutch online shop store that sells hammers, or bags, or hams, nice Bellota or Serrano hams. In a way, they all look the same, you know? So they've all been royally Shopified, as I call it. This is the Shopify disease. It's so easy to put an online store out there with whatever crap you want to sell. But the problem is, if you Shopify it, everything will look the same. But if you look at the real stores of these companies, this is Gamma, this is a building, do-it-yourself market in the Netherlands. This is what it looks like on the interior. This is what that bag shop looks like. And this is what that ham shop looks like. So somehow we humans have understood that when we walk into a physical store, that it needs to look and feel and smell very different whether you're selling hams or hammers, where online, we're not there yet, right? Everything looks the same. So dare to stand out with your service. Dare to get some of that knowledge and experience and heritage that you've already built into your physical space also back into your online store. And don't let everything be dictated by Shopify, please. So if brands have personality, why don't digital services show more character? This is a really good example, Slack. We use it every day. Lots of people in the creative industries use it every day. Not just because it's a very convenient platform, but also because it has a certain personality of its own. This Slack bot, which is built in, is sometimes a bit obnoxious. Sometimes it's really helpful. It has moods, stuff like that. And you can even, if you are a big company and you have some time on your hands, you can program your own Slack bot. So it becomes like your digital representation of your own brand that is helping all your consumers to become more aware of your own brand, stuff like that. I love it. It's really, really good. Another great example, it's been around for a while, but they're still doing a great job, is this one, is MailChimp. And they use language, written language, text. The visuals are nice, but quite exchangeable. What's really lovely is the way they talk about things, things that are happening to you while you're using the user interface. High fives, rock on, stuff like that. And it's governed by a fantastic online manual. That's the MailChimp Content Style Guide, and you can just Google it. It's styleguide.mailchimp.com. Every content strategist, every writer for a business or company should have this in his or her bookcase, because it is fantastic. It's a great example of really good content strategy and content branding. So define your own voice and raise it. Make sure that others experience your voice. Know where your service is. So you've created this fantastic service, but maybe it's not in the right place. For instance, in our field of wayfinding, right? There's a lot of wayfinding happening in malls, in shopping malls here in Singapore, for instance, or in hospitals, or in public spaces like airports or train stations. And when people get lost in these big spaces, often the answer of the wayfinding people inside the organization is, oh, well, let's create an app, because everybody carries it with you, right? So you have it always with you. Wherever you go, you use your app. Now, of course, if you're on a crowded train station platform and you want to quickly go from one train to another, would you use an app here? Sometimes a context needs a completely different solution. It can be a technical solution. And in this case, this is a project of ourselves back 6-7 years ago in the Netherlands. Sometimes the solution is to create a 400-meter long screen above the platform that informs people where they can go into the train, where first class and second class compartments are, where you can enter with your bicycle, very important for Dutch people, or with your wheelchair. And even more importantly, where it's busy in the train, so where you probably have to stand, and where you might find a seat. Simple color, 3 colors, orange, green and red, that indicate that. So this solution could have been an app. In fact, the Dutch Railways was already developing an app for this. And we said no, based on our research and based on observations, etc. And a lot of things have happened there. I won't go into details. We think this should be the solution. So it was tested for 3 months on one station. They rated, or they checked with the users what was their brand liking of the Dutch Railways brand before the experiment and after the experiment. And it jumped. It really jumped, just by doing this. So this was a solution for a very specific problem. It's not a solution that you can easily put somewhere else, like here in the MRT. No, well, it won't work here, because the MRT system works completely differently. But in the Dutch specific situation for that railway system, it works, and it's now being implemented. We're very, very proud of that. We won big awards with it, but most importantly, it's becoming a reality now, and that's fantastic. So grab the hand of your customer. We did that. We walked behind customers. We filmed them up till they turned it around and wanted to punch us in the face, because we were so, what are you doing? We're observing you. Don't worry. No. You have to grab the hand of the customer, because you have to understand their journey and their problems and their pains while they're experiencing things. Stress makes people dumb. That's one of the learnings we found out there as well. And in that train station, when people are stressful because they need to catch their train, they don't want to look on an app and figure out, no. So you have to be incredibly simple, incredibly clear, colors, some icons, that's it. That's what they can assimilate at that stage, at that moment. Keep it incredibly simple. So you have to understand, when are people searching and when are people browsing? When are they able to search and when are they able to browse? If people don't have time, search. If people have time, let them browse. And so in a customer journey through an airport, for instance, this is really interesting. So if you plot the stress level of people in the different stages of their customer journey, right? So preparation, going away from home, then the stress level starts to rise, right? Parking, check-in, etc. The highest stress level is at security, always. And then after security, relax, finally. Coffee, whiskey, whatever. So when people are at their lowest stress level, that's where shopping should be, because then people have time, they are at ease again, they have time to think about other things, to maybe even buy a bag or something like that. Yeah. So most airports already do this. Not all of them. Some have all the shopping before check-in and security, and others do it after security, though those are the clever ones. And why? Because of this. When you search, it's usually stress. And when you're open to buy something, it's browse, right? So that's why it's so important that when you're in the search field and people are stressed, that your information is very structured and very clear. So again, it needs to be useful, it needs to be time-boxed, etc. So we completely rewrote the website texts for Schiphol Airport, because even in that stage of still being at home, stress levels already start rising. And especially when they're on the road and they have to check, is there a change of gate or something like that on your phone? Again, that interface needs to be incredibly simple. Changi does a pretty good job, but it's still not there. It's still too complex. It's too much going on. You're being bombarded with commercial stuff where you're not ready for it. You don't want it at that moment. So you have to really help them. People will not engage with your brand or with your products and services if they're stressed. Simply not ready for it. Technology is not always the answer. For instance, in hospitals, in hospitals somewhere, patients got sick because of wrong medication. This happened. This is a real story. And of course, the obvious solution is bring in more technology. Let's streamline the process. Let's tag everything with stickers so we don't mess things up. Let's organize it better. Structure, no. No, in the end, the only thing that was necessary was this. A really simple solution. All these people, these nurses and helpers that were bringing around the medication to all the hospital rooms, because they were staff, they got asked questions. They were constantly being taken out of their routine of what they were supposed to do. So because of that, they started making mistakes. Their stress level also rose, maybe not very much, but enough to start making mistakes, with fatalities happening. So the solution was incredibly simple. Just put them on this little red thing when they were doing their medication rounds. It's very analog, it's not digital at all. So sometimes the answer is not digital, it's just very simple and analog. Look for the real problem, ask more questions, and validate your answers. 10, last one. Things get better by change, not by chance. And that wraps up everything, basically. So rethink your thinking, and I hope I've helped a little bit today in rethinking your own thinking. Thank you very much.